Hi, and welcome back to ConTinual. Tonight, we're going to take you to a land and a time and a world or a galaxy far, far away. Welcome to May the 5th, and tonight we're going to be talking all about Star Wars. So before we dive into all the fun, let's find out who has decided to join us for the party. So, Alma, you are up first.
At the risk of annoying two major fandoms, may the force be with you. I went to see the original Star Wars movie when I was 15 years old, which prompted my mother to tell me many times since then, on various occasions in which I tried her patience, you were normal before you saw Star Wars. So you might takeaway lesson from that is that I was a different person before and after Star Wars hit. And it's been that way ever since. I mean, I've just been kind of following along just because it was there. And when my husband frankly refused to go to the first the trilogy that shall not be mentioned, the Jar Jar Binks saga, he simply refused to follow there, and he was just saying, this is not good enough for me to watch. And I'm going, but it's Star Wars, and I'm going there anyway because I need to know the story. I need to know whatever. But I'm going to have more to say on that subject as we go along. Handing over to the others.
Mrs. Carr.
Moi? When I am not busy writing science fiction books, I am a massive science fiction fan. Hi, I am R.E. Carr, but you can call me Rachel because it's much easier. I was born the same year of Star Wars. My dad was a big fan of science fiction, and I have grown up with it. It is the only series that I can say safely I have seen every movie in the theater. And I took my kids, and it's been quite an experience. And I have many opinions, which I will try not to get overexcited and blast my full ADHD self on, but I make no promises if I get really excited or anything with Obi-Wan Kenobi comes up.
Janine.
Hi, I'm Janine K. Spendlove. I too am also a writer. I'm also a Marine. And this is Samwise, who wants to be in my lap. And the thing that I'm really excited about and why I was really glad I was on this panel is that my Star Wars short story that I wrote several years ago just got re-released in hardcover. And I'm so excited because I'm like, I wrote that scene and it's so cool to see like artwork of it, and just it's really neat. And the entire community and fandom means so much to me. I've been a member of it my whole life, and you know, it's just been great to find my find my tribe, find my group, find my people.
And Matthew.
Matthew Saunders. I'm also an author. I guess I'm a little different. I was 2 years old when the first one came out. Star Wars came out in '77. But when I was a kid, I wasn't super into it. Like, I was the prime demographic, you know, for Empire, you know, I was 5. For Jedi, I was 8. You know, but I wasn't super into it when I was a kid. I got into it actually when the special editions came out when I was in college. That's when I became a fan of Star Wars. So I think maybe that gives me a little bit of a different perspective than a lot of people who remember it from when they were kids. But that's kind of, you know, since then I've been a super fan of it and seen all the movies in the theater and many of the television shows and read many of the books. So.
Well, and I did actually I've seen every single one of them in the theater on first run, because I was probably 7 when the first one came out. So I'm trying to remember. I was either 6 or 7. So I remember seeing the first one in the theater when it came out.
Come on, am I really the oldest person in this group?
I don't have that much gray hair. Oh, wait, it's all gone. Never mind. But if we take a look, and this is your final, and fair warning, we may be discussing spoilers. So if you have not watched some particular series or another, that's on you. This is all your own fault. You just catch up. So as we dive into and start talking about tonight, I will tell you one of the first things that I remember because of my OCD as a kid was going and saying, wait, we're starting with movie number 4. Where the hell are the first 3? And that is
you wish you hadn't asked that now, don't you?
Well, no, I ask. I'm an inquiring person. And I think I want to start with this idea of we have a fandom we all love so ardently that is also a little frustrating at times.
A little?
Slightly divisive, slightly. So, Alma, how about you? How have you felt going through the trials and the tribulations of the series over time?
Well, as I said, I walked into the New Hope when I was 15. Leia was, or Carrie Fisher at least, was 19 when she made that first movie, which was pretty much my generation. I glommed onto Leia hard. She has been my princess and my general for my entire lifetime. I've been in her cohort all my life. Essentially, she was a badass who just could do whatever she wanted, and she didn't have to rely on anybody. She could do her own thing, but she also attracted the kind of people that she needed to attract to get things happening. And quite honestly, when I first saw the original movie, once Han Solo walked onto the screen, I know Luke was supposed to be the hero, but he was such a weed in that first movie that it was very hard to basically connect with him as a hero of anything. I'm too little short to be a stormtrooper kind of covers it. When Han Solo walked in, it just kind of stole the show and ran away with it. I will tell you what really hit me when the new trilogy, the latest trilogy came out, when The Force Awakens came out, and I went to see that, and they had Leia step out of that spaceship. And when I first saw the first movie, I was 15 and she was 19. We were a generation together. And when she stepped out of that ship, she was still my generation. They let her age. They let her age gracefully. They let her age in power, and she was still my general. And I practically cried my way through that first movie just seeing that. That's how hard it affected me. So, I've been following this Skywalker story, if you like. I haven't been following the rest of it so much because Mandalorian, for instance, was behind a paywall for me, and I just didn't have the ready cash to subscribe to various streaming services just so I could follow one series or another somewhere or other. So I didn't actually see the Mandalorian other than in dribs and drabs. But the original Star Wars has been my guiding star for a while, for very many years.
Rachel, how about you?
Oh, for me? Well, when I first saw the first 2 movies in the theater, I was too little to really remember or appreciate them. So for me, my first experience really getting Star Wars was my grandpa put it on. He had HBO. And that in the 80s was so cool. So I got to go and I got to see Star Wars. And I just remember curling up on the sofa. And come on, I was a little kid with undiagnosed ADHD. I never sat still for anything. I didn't move for that entire film. And I remember the moment so clearly, the first time burned in my brain, when Luke Skywalker stares at the horizon at the 2 suns. Never in my life in a film had I felt a moment like my heart skipped a beat. And just that sort of moment of wistfulness, and like somebody who, for me, being a little girl in Tennessee, like you could go out and do amazing things, and there were princesses and there were laser swords and Wookiees and everything. I was completely overwhelmed. And the thing that drove my mom crazy was like, I wanted all the Star Wars things. And she was like, but no. She got me a Princess Leia doll. Like she thought that was okay. But then she didn't understand that I wanted Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, and I wanted to run around and have adventures, and I would be telling stories, set on planets. And then I finally saw Empire Strikes Back, and I was like, oh my God, and it's dark, and I can tell stories like this. Yeah, my mom was concerned. My dad was like, yes, she's my child. And you know, that was the moment that sealed it. My whole life I was so excited, and then I remember as a teenager, like, oh my god, they're going to do novels and I'm going to finally find out what happens. And I read them and I was such a little bleep to Timothy Zahn. And I am, if you ever watch this, Timothy Zahn, I am so sorry I was rude to you in that line. I am still trying to apologize. I know better now. Being a writer is hard. And then, you know, it just kept going, and now I'm taking my kids to it. But it's one of those things that if it hits you at the right moment, I know logically it's a lot of, they tap into myth, they tap into the hero's journey, they tap into a lot of, you know, Kurosawa-esque cinematic concepts that hit you viscerally. Like, I can tell you that it's basically the MSG of filmmaking. It's going to make everything seem awesome, and it's going to hit you in all the happy places in your brain. But if it gets you just right, there is no rush quite like Star Wars.
Janine?
And I think that's why it's so intense.
Oh, yeah, well.
So I think, like many people, there are things about Star Wars that I absolutely love and adore. For example, Alma, my license plate says P Leia. I mean, she's my princess. She's my, and as a woman in the military, to see her be a general, like, yeah, that's pretty big for me. And then there are things that I just don't enjoy, don't like, not fond of. And now that we have so much Star Wars, in fact, I had this conversation the other night. We were at a First Contact Day showing of Star Trek, First Contact, and not to mix the fandoms here, but this gentleman came in and he sat next to me and my husband, and he basically started dumping on a lot of Star Trek. And I just looked at him and I said, hey, I sorry, man, I really like those shows, but like, that's the beauty of Star Trek. There's so much of Star Trek that, like, you find something you like. And I think that that's how Star Wars is. There's so much of Star Wars that you know, when I was younger, particularly in my 20s, there were things that I loved to hate on. And now I look back at it and I'm like, oh, that was just silly, because there's so much for me to just love on now. And I love the things that I love, and the things I don't love, I just don't watch or don't read, and I avoid. And I'm much happier this way. And as far as, because there are toxic areas in the fandom too, I just avoid those areas too, because let's be honest, there are some not nice people, but overwhelmingly everybody's very nice and welcoming. And we'll just avoid the not nice people. As to how I came into it, I will admit, I think earlier we were talking about, before this recorded, we were talking about Ewoks. I mean, for me, I definitely watched Star Wars, but I was that 6-year-old girl who my parents had recorded the Battle for Endor off the television. And so Sindel Talani, or Tawani, I can't say her last name, Sindel was my jam. I was a little girl with my hair's super curly like Sindel's, only very dark. And this is what a flat iron does to it. And so it was a little girl with my crazy curly hair. Like, I was absolutely in love with that. And then we also had the latter half of Return of the Jedi. And so my brothers and I would watch that on repeat, Battle for Endor and the latter half of Return of the Jedi, over and over and over again until we wore that VHS tape out. And that was the start.
Did you have an Endor playset? Because that was so awesome.
Not until my 20s.
Respect.
But I did get one eventually, and a Death Star one too. I'm not going to go into the crazy levels of collecting I did in my 20s once I had a little bit of expendable income after deploying multiple times. This is, some people, you know, deploy multiple times and take all of their, you know, extra tax-free money that they make in combat to like buy crazy cars. Or no, what Janine did is she bought a bunch of Star Wars collectibles she'd always wanted as a child. And as a teenager and couldn't afford. So I bought them as an adult.
That is so cool.
I still want the Lego Death Star. The original, not the second one. That's just me. How about you, Matthew?
So Star Wars, first of all, I start out with my son's name is Luke. But for me, I mean, Star Wars is big and sprawling and messy, and sometimes the pieces don't all fit together, and sometimes things don't make sense. I like it because it's big and it's messy, and sometimes it doesn't make sense, and sometimes the pieces don't fit together. I mean, for all the people who just whinge about continuity and everything else, I just want to say, have you ever read a comic book? I mean, seriously, like, I mean, let's talk about, like, whomst among us can explain the origin of Hot Girl, for one. I mean,
Which
there's
one?
no, there's no, um, comic books, and I approach Star Wars like, I mean, like Greek mythology or like Arthurian legend. I mean, how many versions of those stories are there?
Well,
But we just
I mean, your life isn't messy. Your real life isn't messy. What do you expect of fiction? Does it always have to be absolutely sense making?
right,
I was going to
exactly.
say, if you followed the news, let's just start with the continuity errors there.
we just accept, the fact that there's this story with Aphrodite where she's sprung up from the sea foam, and there's other story with Aphrodite where her dad Zeus, or Apollo's the sun god, or Helios is the sun god, or Arthur got the sword from the Lady of the Lake, or he pulled it from the stone. We just accept that there are just multiple versions of all those stories. And with Star Wars, I just feel like it's the same thing. I mean, how many thousands of people, creators, among the film, the movies, and the books, and the television shows, and the role-playing games, and the comic books? I mean, how many thousands of creators over almost 50 years of this franchise have touched that story? You can't expect everything to fit together all the time, and you can't expect to agree with the creative choices that those people make all the time either. I mean, there definitely things I would have done differently especially in the 1, 2, 3 trilogy and the 7, 8, 9 trilogy. But I was not consulted. So
Yeah, I never got a memo either. It's so weird.
You didn't
So,
get your invite to the meeting?
And the thing we don't know is what constraints were put on the creators. We don't know. We weren't told what they could do or couldn't do, or what they could say or couldn't say. We don't know what they initially wrote or drafted or scripted, and then we're told, no way, absolutely not, change it. Or we're told, yeah, that's amazing, everyone's gonna love it, and then they didn't. It's always a gamble.
So I mean, that's just the way I've approached it, is kind of like Janine said, I like the things I like, and I don't like the things I don't like, and I just don't worry about the things I don't like and focus on the things I like.
Well, and to me, I think that's one of the best things about this universe, especially with the explosion of different things that are available to us now to fill in the holes, to fill in the gaps, between the books and TV shows and the animated series and the games and all the different things that let us fill in and see this universe from other people's perspectives. One of the things that I've actually argued before on panels before is sometimes some of the reasons we see continuity errors in this universe is it is from a place far, long ago, and a place far, far away. Who's the narrator? Whose eyes are we watching these events through sometimes? Whose story are we seeing as we go through? Which means sometimes maybe what they knew is not the same thing as what somebody else knew. And that becomes a nice, easy way of excusing things. Then we have things like the Star Wars holiday special.
Do we have to talk about the Star Wars holiday special? Because Life Day is a thing. It's a real trauma in my life, and B. Arthur sings, okay? Do we need to say any more?
But in the new Trek, so listen to me. In the new Star Wars, Life Day is canon because they mentioned it in the Mandalorian.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's where we first get to see Boba Fett. And so as much as I know a lot of people don't like, the holiday special, it's very important to Star Wars canon.
Yes, it is. Despite the fact that George Lucas tried to make that go away a time or two. So now that I've brought back generational trauma.
That was a late night seeing that in college. Oof.
Yeah, I made my wife watch that a couple of years ago. She swore to me that it did not exist. And thankfully, it does exist on YouTube, including the things at the beginning of it that say, tonight, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be seen, so that we can present to you Life Day. So
I have never seen it. I just want to put out there that I have never seen it. And that was
Spoiler
that's
alert.
been a oh, I
Be
know.
Arthur
I
Sphinx.
know what goes on in it, but it's been a conscious choice to not watch it.
It's a good choice. I respect it, and
I'm
say
not
you should
bagging
keep it.
on it, and I know, and I have friends who love it and embrace it. I just have made a conscious choice not to watch it.
So, but one of the things that to me has always really been one of the things that about the universe that I think brought so much of it to me is when you come in, and this kind of goes to what Matthew was talking about, it feels lived in. It feels real. You know, you look and you see there's scratches on the paint, and you know, if you're looking at Star Trek, it's clean, it's polished. You know, you don't see that. But Star Wars to me has always felt that lived in universe. I know a lot of that comes from the idea of the practical effects, but even the digital imagery that's been used.
This links back to several things that were discussed, including what you just said. But I think the point of Star Wars, in a lot of ways, is that it has the weight of a true myth. It has the weight of something that never happened, but might have happened and should have happened. And I think that a lot of us who walked into it at whatever point of entry that any of us did so, we did so, and I use the word studiedly here, recognized it. We walked in and it was on some level real for us because I don't know, remembered it, knew it. And what you said is like, it feels lived in. It feels like we'd already lived in it. It feels like we just happened to walk into a door that happened to be left open, but the world was always there. It was always there. And I think that once you've heard that music at the beginning of that movie, that's always been the key to that thing. And once you've heard that, every time you hear that iconic da da da, then you're basically off and running in a different direction. But we recognized it. We walked into a world that I think this is what the dissonance between myself and my mother when she said I was normal before Star Wars. I walked in through that door and I felt at home in that universe because it was a place I have always lived.
Anybody want to talk, add anything to that?
I was just going to say, sorry. No. Go ahead.
You go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, I just had this conversation the other day with someone about the Book of Boba Fett, because that show, more than any other, showed like normal people like living their lives in that universe. And that's one of the things I really liked about that show, is that it wasn't, Skywalkers and imperial generals and emperors and things like that. It was just normal people trying to just survive in this environment. And I really enjoyed that about the Book of Boba Fett and really liked that. And that was one of the things that in general, like you're saying about Star Wars, is that it's always had that, but especially in the Book of Boba Fett, it really focused on that, which I think was really neat for that show.
Mandalorian too. It had more of a ground level, very much more of a sort of spaghetti Western feel, as opposed to big epic mythical space Western. So yeah, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess on that vein, that's why I absolutely loved like the X-Wing books, because it was about real people, particularly the Wraith Squadron ones were about like non-Jedi. They were just, regular folks. And, again, as someone who's in the military, it was really nice to, portray the regular folks who are fighting. Same with why, the Battlefront books and things like that.
In one sense, that is the strength of the whole thing, because it can focus on the macro and the micro and provide both at a level that people can identify with. I mean, look, there's the Death Star. We can blow up an entire damn planet from a different solar system. But at the same time, here are these real people living their real lives somewhere else. And this is all going on at the same time. And it makes kind of a magical kind of sense because, like I said, it's a real world. This all happens somewhere, or will happen, or will have happened, or I'm getting tangled up in my tenses. But you know what I mean?
Well, one of the other things I want to throw out here is this idea, because, we have a perception, especially mainly from the movies, of, and especially when you get into the prequels, the Jedi feel like this huge presence. The Empire feels like this huge presence, or as we go in through the stories, we see this huge presence. But really, so much of what we see in terms of people, how they interpret the Jedi and all that, it's, oh yeah, they might have been real, but that's folklore. And I think that's one of those things that when we look at some of the later series, that presentation that says, oh yeah, there might have been this handful of space wizards running around, but who really knows? I mean, the average person is never going to have seen a lightsaber in their life. The average person is never going to have encountered any of all of this, and they just wanted to be a moisture farmer. They just wanted to, raise whatever they were doing, wherever they were. So as we look at some of these stories that dive deeper into, how people are really actually living, we consider this as a very highly technological civilization, but so many places they're still living in stone huts. Stone huts with droids, but they're living in a stone hut. So Rachel, as you look at kind of that world and how so much of that flies around, for you, what does it tell you? I mean, how does that feel to you in terms of being real or not?
I think it makes it feel a little more. I always joke that Star Wars is science fantasy rather than like you think of Star Trek being more science fiction, because there's always a technological solution for everything. I kind of like Star Wars messy mysticism and the choices people make, and the fact that technology is withheld. Like they use stuff very practically. Like they have droids to do practical stuff like chop their vegetables. They're not interested in really full terraforming of planets anymore. That was just the old time, the High Republic, when people cared. At this point, it's almost like it's a break. You watch it sort of progress as the universe breaks down and the bureaucracy breaks down. I mean, I remember watching in The Mandalorian, there's an episode where you kind of get the impression that, yeah, to this one planet, the Imperials were great. They came in, cleaned up crime, and everything was better, and they left them alone. So, you just, it is that very macro micro divide. And I like the fact that the universe gives you variety. If you want to tell a big, awesome, space battle story in it or watch it, you can. On the flip side, you can kind of go down and just have a simple revenge story or basically a retelling of Lone Wolf and Cub and enjoy it all in the same universe. You get a similar vibe, but completely different stories.
Yeah, you can have the universe that at the same time includes the Death Star and Baby Yoda, and it all makes sense.
Everything makes sense with Baby Yoda. Baby Yoda is my ultimate, like, say what you will about anything else in the universe. Anyone comes after Grogu, no. I will get my lightsaber out.
Janine?
I really liked what Rachel had to say, and it had me thinking about how, what I do in the Marine Corps is I'm a C-130 pilot. So I've been to well over 50 countries in the world. And let's face it, in the military, we're not always going to the nicest. I'm not trying to bag on any countries. We're not always going to the most developed places. And so it's interesting how her point of, as you get farther and farther away from where the main places of power are, people are really more just interested in surviving day to day. But then as you go back to the more developed places and you really dig down and nug down, people are really just trying to survive day to day. And a lot of people really don't care who's in charge as long as they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so we have this big epic scale tale of the Empire versus the Rebellion, or whatever iteration of it we want to talk about. And then you also have, on the micro level, I just want to be a dang moisture farmer. Leave me alone. I don't care who's in charge as long as there's not crime and I'm not getting my stuff stolen from me. And that's a story that's lived out and told every single day on our own planet in reality. And I think that that's why it's so relatable.
Matthew?
I don't know. I have a slightly pessimistic view of human nature. So I always felt like Star Wars was closer to what would actually happen if humans were able to easily travel to other planets versus Star Trek. I always thought Star Trek was a little too utopian in its vision. It may have been something to aspire to, and I still enjoy Star Trek, but I just felt like Star Wars is closer to what would actually happen. Which
yeah, and who would be the jerks who built the Death Star and blew planets up? It'd be the humans. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I agree.
So for that reason, I always thought, Star Wars always resonated with me better because I'm like, yeah, I mean, that would happen. There would still be money. There would still be people who wanted all the money. There would still be people who wanted the land because of the money. There would still be all of these conflicts that we have now. Those would not go away. And that's, so not to be a downer, but I always felt like Star Wars, was closer to realer, I guess, than other space opera franchises, because of that. But
you're not being a downer. When I was watching First Contact on First Contact Day, when Picard was explaining, oh, we don't have money anymore in the future, I audibly laughed. Like I hadn't seen the movie since I think the first time it was in the theater, and I just remember loving it. And as I was watching it this time, I was like, oh my, I mean, I love it. It's still a great movie, but I was just like, oh, this is fantasy. This is pure fantasy.
Star Wars has got a lot more of that human randomness to it than Star Trek does. I mean, in Star Wars, how do I put this metaphorically? Sometimes you're Coruscant and sometimes you're Alderaan. It just depends on which side of the Death Star you're at, whether you control it or are blown up by it. It's not something that happens in Star Trek that much, except possibly when Q is involved. Because he's basically just cosmic chaos personified, and he just does what he does, and he does what he wants, and there's no talk. I mean, yeah, okay, let's leave Q out of this. But I think Star Wars basically has that level of verisimilitude, and you're right. It's the kind of thing that you would expect stupid humans to get involved in because we've been there before and we will be there again. And it's just not something that we seem to be able to snap out of. This is just these cycles of human conflict that just repeat themselves, and it's not that hard to believe that at some point in the future or the distant past or whenever the hell Star Wars was supposed to have happened, basically it was the same rut and we're still in it.
But they keep trying, and that's the hopeful part. They keep trying.
But there's always a rebellion. There's always somebody that keeps that flame going of we can be better. We maybe one day, someday can be better. There's always somebody. And that is part of the draw of Star Wars, because you identify with that little candle in the dark and going, okay, we're going to be those people now.
So, looking at this greater universe and again, kind of diving into this stuff. So Janine, I do want to throw this at you because of course, what you do for a living, how do you feel about what we see represented as the various military forces?
I mean, so I take, as with anything that I watch, I take a lot of it with a grain of salt. And I have friends who are writers who ask me how to portray their military sci-fi. I try to, I tell them, hey, this is how we do it right now in the American military. But if you look at history 50 years ago, it was different. If you look at 100 years ago, it was different. If you look at any other military in the world right now. There are similarities, but there are differences. And then if you go back 1,000 years, things were way different. And so I think when you start going in the realm of science fiction or fantasy, there are going to be definitely some things that don't change, such as the character of war might change and will change. The nature of war does not change. It doesn't change. How we fight it, yes, but the actual foundational nature of war, that doesn't change. And so as long as that, I think, is portrayed well, then I'm not really going to complain. I'll sometimes laugh about stuff because I legit laughed in Rise of Skywalker when all those like Star Destroyers were there, because I was like, how is there even enough metal in the entire known galaxy and people to crew those, much less keep it a secret? And so that's when we have this thing in aviation called the I believe button. And so that's when I'm just like, I believe, whatever. Okay, it's this, I'm just going to sit here and enjoy this movie, like stuff like that. And so little things like that, whatever, but interaction and the way Vader keeps killing his officers, especially now in hindsight, I'm like, that's kind of, I mean, you're killing off your experience. I mean, they might be idiots, but it's, you can't just replace them immediately. It takes like 30, 40 years to grow an admiral, man. Like, just a thought.
Yeah. The good ones knew not to be assigned by petulant Jedis. Like, they were all out of line of sight of force chokes.
Yeah, that's not how the military works, though. You don't get to really pick your assignments. You go where you're told and you do what you're told. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing the job I'm doing right now. I would not be at the Pentagon flying a desk instead of out in the fleet flying an airplane.
Mm.
At some point, particularly as you get more senior in rank, you got to go where you're told. And that is actually very realistic. And I think the way that people feared Vader and were very careful and cautious with how they talked to him. And I will say, I did appreciate the fact that Captain Nita is like, I'm going to accept full responsibility for this. Like, that is some good military leadership right there. That is good military. He probably protected the rest of his crew from getting executed. So that is someone to be admired. And there's someone to be admired on both sides in that regard. Although I'm not like, maybe I want to retract that. I don't want to like give a pass to space Nazis here, because clearly I'm not trying to. On the rebellion, I gotta say, I'm often just like pulling my hair going, what is going on here? And then I have to remind myself that they're not actually like a formal organized thing until really we see it a little bit in Return of the Jedi, but they're just getting who they can get, and they're guerrilla war fighters, and so they're just gonna do what they're gonna do. And so at that point I just go, okay, whatever they do. Anyway, that's a long rambling answer to your question. Yeah, the I believe button gets pressed a lot, but in Star Wars, the nature of war is, in my opinion, accurately represented. So I'm happy.
So now I want to throw something out to everybody, because this is where the fun starts, if it hasn't already. So, we've mainly been talking about the films and getting in kind of that fandom side of thing. But we've been watching, Disney has, of course, been expanding through the TV shows, showing us a much larger universe. As we were talking about, the one that really does feel like the one where we get to see potentially what would be us. People trying to live in the lower levels of Coruscant, people trying to make their way out on some desert planet, trying to deal with the spice trade, and of course that calls back to Dune and the spice. But, we see in a lot of these places, the syndicates running things. The Hutts are in essence a governmental system as we look at a lot of these things. So as we start looking at things like the Mandalorian, where we get to see the remnants of a fallen empire, we get to see a different kind of religious system. What about the Mandalorian? For those of you that have seen it, I mean, how's that spoken to you? I mean, how did that really hit you guys? Including the baby Grogu. Yes, I know, I'm aware. Everyone's addicted to the baby Yoda. So the first question I'm going to ask there is, Do you think Yoda is his daddy or her?
No. There were more of his
Oh.
species. I don't think he is. He was a Jedi, thus he was celibate.
No, Jedi's
I
were not
don't
necessarily
care, to
celibate.
be honest. I don't think it matters.
I,
It doesn't add to or take away from Grogu's story.
what are you going to
Grogu
say?
to me.
Oh, I am your father. You know.
Like, to me, it really doesn't matter.
Everything matters with Grogu, don't you understand?
No, I mean,
Everything.
I don't think if Yoda was Grogu's dad or spawn giver, however it works in their species.
Yeah.
I don't think that it makes him greater than what he is or less than what he is. Same with if he isn't. He's still the adorable little Jedi youngling that he is, regardless. So I don't think it adds to or takes away from his story personally.
But other than that, from the greater Mandalorian story, how are you guys feeling about the storyline, where it's come from, where it's going to, and how it's spinning off things like Book of Boba Fett?
Should I talk? I don't want to be the bully.
Go for it.
Okay. Also, I
was throwing the softball up your way.
Oh, okay. I love Mandalorian. Actually reinvigorated my love of Star Wars because I was having some crisis of faith after Rise of Skywalker. I love the Wild West feel. I love the consistent narrative. I love the sort of seeing the Hutts who kind of get left alone because they sold weapons to the rebellion. So the rebellion's kind of like, okay, you can sort of have a little bit of free reign. And I liked seeing the bounty hunter, the guy who had no Jedi powers, just sort of taking the job and not being able to go through with it because he was a fundamentally very lonely, abandoned character whose tribe had been split apart. He finds someone who was just like him and abandoned, and, he ended up being a father figure. It's a beautiful, personal, sort of familial story, and it's really fun to follow. And then you get to see all the Dave Filoni Easter eggs as he starts bringing in all the coolest parts of Clone Wars and sneaking them in to live action. And I loved the way it developed, and I will do anything for Grogu. Let's be real. Like the moment they opened the little cube and I saw the ears, because I had no spoiling, no nothing. I legit squealed like I was suddenly that 6-year-old Rachel again, watching my first X-Wing. I just went, and stood there for mute for about 10 minutes. It was a wonderful experience, and it brought the magic of Star Wars back. And then it went to the Book of Boba Fett, which I liked some parts and then found narratively it kind of fell apart. Like I loved the idea of it. I just thought the execution was really weird in pacing in the middle, and there was the scooter scene.
I'm not going to complain about the scooter scene because legit the first short story I ever had published that ever got picked up and published was featured a high-speed chase in Washington D.C. down 495 beltway traffic, so it was like 10 miles per hour. And that was the hilarious point. But that was the point, is it was supposed to be slow because of the nature of the setting of where it was. And so it was supposed to be funny. So I took the slow little Vespa scooter. As somebody who used to have a little scooter in college, I loved their little Vespas, and I thought the chase was hilarious. I thought its slowness added some levity and humor that was needed.
I loved the scooter scene because it was at that point that I first of all, I was like, okay, this is kind of ridiculous. But then I realized that like Boba Fett's bodyguards, the mods, they're an 80s synth pop band. Seriously, it's like having the Human League as your bodyguards. And it was just, so at that point, it kind of transcends the ridiculousness. It's like, okay, this is so ridiculous that it actually works.
I don't know if it worked for me, but it was hilarious. It reminded me of Space Mutiny. Like, if you've ever seen that absolutely horrible Star Wars ripoff from the early 80s, where it has the world's slowest chase scene. It was like little old ladies on scooters going, beep, 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 I'm going to get the peas. Beep, 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 keep going. So, yeah, it had a definite grocery store chase vibe.
Meanwhile, I want to know how I can get a space scooter. I
I
want
want
one.
the I want the
I want
space
the red one.
I
I
want
want the
space
yellow one.
Vespa.
You want
But
the
what
space Vespa, yeah.
what it reminded me of though is that honest, like on a certain level, I mean, Star Wars obviously speaks to all of us on a very personal level, but what it reminded me is that you can't take it too seriously. That you have to recognize at a certain point that everything is kind of ridiculous, and that
I mean, yeah, we're accepting like space wizards and laser
Right.
swords and force choking
Right.
people and like, but a slow chase scene on
Right.
brightly colored scooters.
Everyone has a
crazy.
limit.
I mean, this is kind of off the topic of that, but I mean, it gets back. I'm reminded of Harrison Ford's performance in the original trilogy. Is that he carried those movies in a lot of ways. Like first of all, he was the everyman character. He was the one that everyone could relate to because he didn't have any special powers. He wasn't a princess. He wasn't a space wizard. He was just a normal guy who just got thrown in and had to deal.
And a little morally little
right,
ethically questionable.
But
hero.
Harrison Ford as an actor, everyone else is trying to be so serious, and Harrison Ford is just playing right down that line in the middle of this is completely ridiculous versus it is perfectly normal that my best friend is a 7 foot tall fur covered alien called a Wookiee who speaks in gargles.
Wookiees rock.
You know, he played right down that line. So I mean that honestly, I mean, I think that's why he carried that movie, because on some level he recognized that he shouldn't be taking his character that seriously.
So I will say the one thing he really could have helped out with on the most recent trilogy is when the very handsome man who plays Poe Dameron asked him for tips on how to fly because he's never flown. He was like, "Oh, you're not really flying. Just get in there and do it." And me, a pilot, watching him try to fly like this with 2 hands is going, "What the heck are you?" That's my one complaint. Okay, as far as military represents that, you do not fly with 2. What are you doing?
Everyone has that limit.
bad.
It's like space wizards I can take.
But flying with 2 hands on the stick, what are you doing? No.
Slow chase scenes. No, that's my limit.
How about you, Alma? I know you were trying to throw something in a minute ago.
You have to accept the idea that you can basically just waltz onto any flying machine whatsoever and you immediately know which buttons to push. I mean,
that is forever my biggest pet peeve with any movie that features flying. So at this point, I just put my little blinders on and I'm like, la, 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 la.
Yeah, with absolutely no training, a lot of people know how to fly some very high-tech stuff out there. I mean, you'd be surprised that most of them don't land up face planted in the nearest mountain, because that's the obvious thing that would happen. But
yeah, flying is actually pretty easy. It is that landing that you're talking about that's the issue. Yeah,
they would land in the wrong place very hard. Yes, it's just a question of you suspend your disbelief to a certain point because you know that you are suspending your disbelief, and you're willing to suspend your disbelief because you like what you're seeing and you're just basically going along with it. Except for people like you who know exactly how flying works, and you see something going wrong and go ah. But things like there's always going to be somebody out there who knows more about a particular subject. With you, it's flying. It could be anything else for anybody else. Somebody's going to pick up some little thing that they know more about and go, "That's wrong." Yeah, it's fantasy, people.
Which is why I just put my little flying blinders on and go. I just enjoy it. What I won't be doing is watching the new Top Gun movie, because I'm probably just going to be rage angry the entire time for multiple reasons, the flying being the least of it.
It's me watching anything with accounting. I get it.
It doesn't necessarily apply right here, but my particular bugbear is things biological and biochemical, because I have a master's degree in molecular biology, and sometimes people in movies do things that make my hair stand on end because that is not the way things work. But you kind of, if it's a good enough context, you kind of go, okay, you get a pass on that. But oh my God, okay, you get a pass on that. But the thing about Star Wars is that it is in one very fundamental way a mythology, and you kind of have to accept that things may or may not have worked as we expect them to work in any kind of realistic scenario. Like I was saying just now, these are not the tropes you're looking for. It's not something that you expect to find, to be able to nail down, to to say that this looks realistic. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be as realistic as it needs to be to function in a storyline that you're accepting as being that world. And I think Star Wars, I think you nailed a little bit of it in saying it feels lived in. It feels like somebody went and dented that universe hard, and you kind of lived through that crash, and you kind of understand where it all came from. Star Wars is easy to believe in because it is so, vitally recognizable from some deep place inside of us. I mean, I really am the oldest person in this group. I really hate that, but I am. I remember seeing the original movies when I was old enough to actually be compos mentis about it. A lot of people here have seen the movie in the theater when they were a babe in arms. The point is that we all recognize it somehow. Whatever age we eventually opened up to sort of sitting up and saying, "Oh, Star Wars," we recognized it at that moment. It became an alternate reality for all of us, and we willingly live in it. All of us willingly live in it. We're talking about Grogu as being a real person. Let's face it, he is, right?
Grogu. I mean, I can't say much. My daughter's first word was Star Wars in a Brooklyn accent. So it's clearly a part of our lives.
Well, before we get out of here, I want to give everybody a chance. Is there anything you want to talk in terms of the universe, the fandom, something we haven't hit on? So everybody hit that. What is that one favorite thing you want to make sure we talk about tonight? So Matthew, I'll hit you up first.
No, I figured you would do that, put me on the spot.
Of course.
No, I mean, as far as we did not get into John Williams at all, which I just need to bring up the absolute genius of his soundtrack for all of the movies and everything, and I have to say, in the Book of Boba Fett, there was the one episode, which, the Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian never used the music. They didn't use John Williams music, but there was that one episode where they did, in two places. They used the Force theme at one time, but it was very subtle and it was very touching, and it made my heart happy when I heard it. Is when Luke was talking about Yoda, they played Yoda's theme. Yeah. And Yoda's theme is a very subtle, it's strings. It's a very gentle theme. And it was only like 2 bars maybe of it, but it was just a perfect moment. And so I think, we owe a lot to John Williams as far as making these movies as great as they are, and his music. So that's
Absolutely.
What I want.
Alma, how about you? What's the one thing we haven't hit on?
And just before I get into that, I was just going to say absolutely about the music, because I don't know about you guys, but to me, that 20th Century Fox fanfare will forevermore be followed by that Star Wars blast, because they just go together in my head now. It's like, I hear the one, I just hear the other one kind of follow it. It's so iconic. It's such a thread that ties it all together that, yeah, I absolutely agree that the music was a great part of it. For me, the thing that I will always happily go on at a tangent for is the relationships. The way that the relationships work in a lot of, you could be talking about the original Star Wars, and you could be talking about the Mandalorian, you could be talking about whatever aspect of it you want, but there is a specific kind of sense of a relationship thread that is important, the way that people relate to each other. And I think that is part of the strength of Star Wars, because they don't just throw things at the screen and see what sticks. You suddenly kind of start teasing out these relationships. That moment in The Last Jedi, when Luke's vision, his sending, came to Leia when they were sitting in the middle of that bunker, and the two of them having that last moment together, it wrecked me. It just wrecked me. That moment where that was a relationship with that brother and sister thing that was carrying across from an ages past. That is part of the strength of Star Wars. The relationships hold it together.
Yeah, and I think you could almost say that those relationships are the Force.
Yes.
For the fandom, those relationships are the Force that tie us all together. How about you, Rachel? What's that one thing?
I think the one thing was, particularly for me growing up and then going to an adult, it was the science fiction where the princess really didn't need to be rescued. I mean, yeah, they had to break her out, but she fired a gun. And then later we had Rey, and there was a lightsaber in a woman's hands, and it was amazing. And Lando Calrissian was like, wow, he was attractive and suave and genteel and everything you wanted. And I love the fact that there's so much diversity, particularly now. And I know some people like to complain about it, but that's the one thing about the fandom I will go, no, you don't get to complain about that, because getting to see the differences, seeing a stormtrooper rise up who happens to be Black, and seeing all these different people getting to be heroes, no matter what they look like or act like or sound like. You know, you could have a tiny green guy be the mightiest warrior in the universe, and you don't have to judge people by the way they look. And I think that's an important part of Star Wars that helps it endure. And anyone who says otherwise clearly didn't watch the originals either, because there's a lot of diversity hidden in plain sight.
Janine?
So, Rachel, I feel like we are having a lot of the similar mind meld tonight.
It's the bands we're communicating across them.
The thing I was going to close out with is, you know, I really appreciated what a very clear and concerted effort Disney has made to make Star Wars more inclusive. I mean, the creators and the authors for years, all through the 90s and the early 2000s, they worked very much to put diversity in the books and where they could in the animated series. But Disney, and yes, they were called out for their lack of diversity and their lack of inclusivity, but they have clearly, I mean, just look at who headlined Book of Boba. You have an Asian woman and I believe he's Maori or
Maori.
Maori.
Yeah, he's Maori.
Yeah.
Okay. And a Pacific Islander and an Asian woman, and they're the two leads in, you know, Book of Boba. That's awesome. And so I really appreciate that effort that Disney's doing. They have more they need to do. I believe so. And I'm with you that, like, anybody who complains about that, I just look at them and I'm like, I'm sorry you want more movies about white guys. Like, you have a ton of movies. Please allow us
share.
to just have a couple. Just share. We're not saying you can't have them. We're just saying we'd like to have some cake too. There's plenty of cake for everybody. Let us all have cake or pie if you don't like cake.
Who doesn't like cake?
I don't know. Some people are weird.
Okay.
Anyways,
Well,
I love the people. I love the friends I've made in this fandom, lifelong friends, and just I just love it. So thanks for letting me be on this panel.
Thanks for coming in for it. One of the things that I think kind of ties all this together for me that I never thought I would see is having empathy for the Sand People, because you never see what they look like, but you see, because when we go back to the original movie, you know, we look at them and they're almost presented as, you know, you could see them as sand warriors. You could see them as almost bestial, you know, bestial things, because that's the way they were presented. But I think that we see they're rounding out that everybody has life and culture and everything to it. And I think that when you can actually have empathy for the Sand People, that says a lot about the story in the universe. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming in tonight and hanging out. But before we get out of here, let's let everybody know where to find you, you know, website, social media, those new releases or re-releases that are coming out. So Alma, how about you?
Well, my website is at www.almaalexander.org, not .com, org. Don't look in the wrong place because the .com was hijacked by a Chinese pet food manufacturer. Don't ask. So it's almaalexander.org, and you can find links to everything else that I do there. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on the usual suspects. I have, well, I might as well tell you now that one of my books has just been named a finalist in the Imagine Awards for this year. So if you really want to go look that one up, it's my short story collection, and it's called Fractured Fairy Tales. It's got nothing to do with Star Wars, but it's it's pure in fantasy form. So if you want to go look for that, please do. Otherwise, I'm in all the usual places and all the usual corners, and I hope to see you in some of them soon.
Rachel?
Well, you can find me at racheleccarr.com because Rachel Carr writes vegan cookbooks and Rachel E. Carr writes about vampires and stuff. You can also find me on social media pretty much everywhere at Total Recar. And if you get my handle, you will understand all my books. My latest one is going to be coming out this summer from Falstaff Press, and it does feature a shiny, flaming laser sword, but not a lightsaber because I respect Disney lawyers.
That's called fear.
Yes.
Janine?
So I'm everywhere on basically just look up my name, Janine K. Spendlove. So .com, Instagram, Facebook, all those places. Haven't really been posting a lot of writing content. I did just finish a book. I need to see if somebody wants to publish a military sci-fi retelling of Pride and Prejudice, because that's what I wrote.
Whoa, I want to
yes.
see it.
I can definitely use a beta reader. So if you're curious, message me because I will get you. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Especially non-military people, because I'm
a pacifist.
Yes, great, perfect. So yes. Anyways, so if anybody wants to publish that, let me know. And I'm retiring from the Marine Corps this summer. I haven't really said that publicly, so hey, I'm saying it publicly now. And looking forward to moving into a school bus and traveling around North Carolina while I'm retired for a year, figuring out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. Writing some more.
Matthew?
You can find me. My website is jmsaunders.com. There's links there to all of my social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest even. So and links to all my books. I tend to, write about vampires and demons and ghosts and werewolves rather than space wizards, but still, that's where you can find me. And I do sometimes talk about Star Wars on my blog.
Well, and I've had the pleasure of being the host for this tonight. I am Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, the Speculative Fiction Academy.com, and of course here at ConTinual, causing trouble when they'll let me out of my cage. So may the 4th be with you always.